Hello. Welcome. My name is Matthew Goulish. I am the dramaturg for Every House Has a Door. We have made this performance for you. It will explain itself, but I will introduce it. This performance offers a loose collection of events, all from the year of the October Revolution in Russia, the year 1917. Now, some of these events we present, some we reenact, and some we respond to. But this performance as composition of collection proceeds from a question. What if we approach history not as chronology, but as geology? Not a timeline of cause and consequence, but a portrait that invites us to imagine the synchronization of different strata contained within as a means of knowing, a stacked up vision of the time, not a model, but a moment. I'll give you one example before Stephen chases me off the stage with a broom and the performance begins. Here in Chicago, the Art Institute presented an exhibition of drawings and dry points by Stanislaw Zukalski, an artist who was born in Gdyla, Poland. This archival exhibition catalog from the year 1917 shows that the exhibition ran only from May 19th to May 31st, a mere 13 days. There were 76 works on paper and 2 sculptures, and one of these sculptures had the title Rabindranath Tagore. So presumably, the artist from Poland sculpted a likeness of the poet from India. Now, in 1917, Tagore would have been deeply involved in India's struggle as a British colony for self-government. And in those years, Tagore wrote a poem titled The Wakening of Shiva, and that poem contained these lines. As far as the eye sees, the darkness whispers, they are gone. Those days are gone. You are time's herdsman. In the evening of an era you sound your horn, and past days rush like cattle to the safety of your byre, eager for its calm. A byre is a cow shed, and I suppose that's what we want our performance to be. Iconography, iconoclasm, irreplaceable currency. None remain who remember. Our voices call out and silence answers. We have writing, documents, photographs, film, and music, always music, and all the memory that those engender. How events have shaped us before we were born. The performance will last 1 hour and 10 minutes. 100 years have passed.
The inner title reads May 2nd, 1917. The film's heroine goes to the city to demand a new tractor. Her embattled attempt at a collective farm, a montage of attractions. Urban, and from the palace of industry, the camera hurtles down the tower, intercut with the same motion, an almost imperceptible transition. She walks out of revolving doors, a dialectical game between constructed and imaginary. This mock-up factory farm, a vision of efficient agriculture, and the gleamingly purest war of nature filmed with lush attention to detail. The production of meat, eggs, and so forth. Aging administrators morphing into portraits of linen. Industrial machinery revealed as close-up stenographic equipment. Modernism. Daily struggle. Unelectrified countryside. A constructivist fantasy in the unconscious of a sleeping peasant. As another inner title proclaims, this is not a dream.
Friday, July 6th, 1917, Globe, Arizona. Miners threaten new revolt. Although 3 federal cavalry troops and a machine gun company maintain order here today, the situation is still threatening. 7,000 workmen, many of Austrian or Slavic birth, are having the spirit of revolt preached to them. It is declared. Reinforcements for the strikers continue to pour in from Miami, 7 miles away.
How do we go back and consider what we find, what we found? Shall we go back? In memory, do you believe in memory and in credibility? Do you have winter weather here? July 25th, 1917, 3 of Japan's leading optical manufacturers merged to form the lens company that will one day produce the Nikon camera. October 1917. American poet Wallace Stevens publishes 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird.
I know noble accents and lucid and escapable rhythms. But I know too that the blackbird is involved in what I know. Russian poet Anna Akhmatova kept a journal of those years. Yvonne will read a passage.
I met him frequently in 1917. Sometimes we rode a horse cab together over the unbelievable potholes of the revolutionary winter, among the famous bonfires that were kept alight almost till May, to the crackle of rifle fire coming from Lord knew where. Later, I lived in complete isolation. The Petersburg shop signs were still there, but behind them was nothing but dust, darkness, and gaping emptiness. It was a time of typhus, famine, shootings, pitch-dark apartments, damp firewood, and people so swollen up as to be unrecognizable. In the Gostiny Dvor, you could pick a large bunch of wildflowers. The famous wooden blocks with which the streets of Petersburg had been paved were finally rotting away. You could still smell the chocolate from the basement windows of crafts. All the cemeteries had been pillaged. The city had not merely changed, it had turned into the antithesis of itself. But people, particularly the young ones, loved poetry almost as much as they do today.
Vladimir Arsenyev devoted 30 years to exploring the Russian Far East. Over the course of several military surveying expeditions, he described the people and the wildlife he encountered on the farthest borderlands of empire. In his 1916 article, Shamanism and Animism among East Siberian indigenous tribes, he documented the religion of the Udege, one of the many Tunguistic-speaking indigenous groups living in Northeast Asia. Situated along the Ussuri River basin and along the Sea of Japan coast. He wrote about the arrival of Russians to the region of the Orochi indigenous group in the lower Amur River basin at the mouth of the Khadzi River in the southern Strait of Tartary. In May of 1853, at the beginning of the Crimean War, I will share with you some of Arsenyev's writing, but first, Tim and Elise and I will attempt to sing a Russian hunting song that was popular at the time. Целый день гуляет.
Яму счастья нету, он и сам себя ругает.
Как ему быть?
Как яму служить, да служить, не забудьте солому, что зверней богит. На тепле воде, где гуляла рыбка, ой, приятной погоде.
Там на берегу.
Ну!
В островах как охотник целый день гуляет, и ему счастья нету, да он и сам себя ругает. Как ему быть? Ну! Как ему служить и дослужить? Ежа быть веселому, что зверь не беги. Поехал охотник на теплые воды, да где гуляла рыбка, да ой, приятной погоде. Там на берегу, эх, ну!
Earth is life, and everything upon it. All of nature is alive. The land, an enormous living thing, lies with its head to the northeast and its legs southwest. Cliffs and crags are people, once living, now petrified. A fast-flowing river is a living thing, as is fire. Each clan tends its own fire with care and respect, because within it lies the old woman of the fire. Each clan hands down the clan flint to the next generation. Bear and sable meat must not be fried, nor boots made of the leather of a male deer. Squirrels should only be fried face up, fish only fried face down. Boats must not be carved from trees felled in a storm. Death does not occur naturally, but because of the interventions of evil spirits. Kakzamu, a mountain spirit, a thin-legged giant, turns people into stone. Boko is a swamp devil, a humpback dwarf with only one arm and one leg. The most terrible spirit is Akzo, a bird with a beak, wings, and teeth of iron. Akzo flies as fast as lightning and lives in a sacred tree called Tiku, crafted on his own instruction by a shaman. All fear this tree and avoid all dead trees, as the spirit of Akzo may inhabit them. The Orochi of the Imperiatorskaya Gavan, the imperial harbor, known for their love of animals, keep their camps as veritable menageries, including bears, wild boars, eagles, eagle owls, and falcons. Empty boats cast ashore by the Orochi frighten them. They view these as clothing shed by Temu, the orca whale, a totemic animal, as he left the water for a walk in the forest. A person has two souls, one astral and the other luminous. One man lost his shadow and fell severely ill. A shaman found the shadow in the sky and returned it to the fellow. The afterlife, called Buni, lies beyond the horizon to the west. The soul, having reached Buni, lives a full life and then dies again and moves further westward. The process continues, life, death, moving west toward the setting sun, each time the soul diminishing slightly until eventually nothing more of it remains. Many now elderly Orochi witnessed Russian arrival in the Ussuri Krai. The first people to visit the Imperiatorskaya Gavan were the Gilyaks. They introduced tobacco. Next came the Nanai. 10 years later, Chinese fur traders appeared seeking sable. They brought kanshin, grain alcohol. One day, something big and terrible appeared in the bay. The Orochi chased it off with rocks. The next day, the monster reappeared, and on the third day, it anchored near shore. This was the Pelagia, a Russian frigate. A small boat rowed from it. The Orochi ran off at first, but then returned to shore to find strangers with a Tunguistic-speaking interpreter. The strangers paid money for catboats, but the Orochi discarded this payment as completely useless. The Russians gave them a few bars of soap, which they tried to eat, but since the taste was unpleasant, they gave it to their dogs instead, which likewise did not eat it. The ship stayed in the bay for a long time. In winter, they watched the Russians chip ice away from the hull, chop down and burn its masts, then sink it. They could not understand why the Russians did this. Then the Russians left the bay with burning timbers still floating in the water. I, Vladimir K. Arsenyev, put down these words on the last days of the year 1916.
El poeta a su amada, de Cesar Vallejo, 1917. Amada, en esta noche tú te has crucificado sobre los dos maderos curvados de mi beso. Y tu pene me ha dicho que Jesús ha llorado y que hay un Viernes Santo más dulce que ese beso. En esta noche tan rara que tanto me has mirado, la muerte ha estado alegre y ha cantado en su hueso. En esta noche de septiembre es oficiado mi segunda caída y el más humano beso. Amada, moriremos los dos juntos, muy juntos. Se irá secando a pausas nuestra excelsa amargura y habrán tocado a sombra nuestros labios difuntos. Y ya no habrán reproches en tus ojos benditos, ni volveré a ofenderte, y en una sepultura los dos nos dormiremos como dos hermanitos. Peruvian writer Cesar Vallejo was born in Santiago de Chuco, a remote village in the Andes. As a young man, he studied in the northwestern coastal city of Trujillo. And in 1917, at the age of 25, he submitted this poem, El poeta a su amada, the poet to his lover, to the journal Variedades in Lima. The journal accepted the poem. It was one of Vallejo's first published works. And the editor, Clemente Palma, wrote Vallejo the following letter. September 22nd, 1917, Trujillo. Mr. Cesar Abraham Vallejo. You too belong to the lot that comes whistling the ditty, which we attribute to everyone who keeps trying to tune their lyrical windbags, i.e. the youth that has been dealt a hand to write kitsch poetic rubbish. And said ditty should let you rest assured that we shall publish your monstrosity. You have sent us a sonnet titled The Poet to His Lover, which in all honesty would be more appropriate for the accordion or the ocarina than for poetry. Your verses are noxious twaddle, and until you remove your piece of junk from the waste paper basket, we shall see nothing else than the dishonor you have done to the people of Trujillo. And if one day your neighbors discover your name, they will find a rope and bind you to the tracks like a tie on the Malabrigo Railroad. Clemente Palma. The Poet to His Lover by Cesar Vallejo, 1917. My love, on this night you have been crucified on the two curved beams of my kiss. Your torment has told me that Jesus wept, that there is a Good Friday sweeter than that kiss. On this strange night when you looked at me so, death was happy and sang in his bone. On this September night, my second fall, and the most human kiss have been presided over. My love, we too will die together, close together. Our sublime bitterness will slowly dry up, and our defunct lips will have touched in shadow. There will be no more reproach in your holy eyes, nor will I offend you ever again. In one grave, we too will sleep as two siblings.
In the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas, Gertrude Stein wrote about the year 1917. In these pictures, Pablo Picasso first emphasized the way of building in Spanish villages, the line of the houses not following the landscape, but cutting across and into the landscape, becoming indistinguishable in the landscape by cutting across the landscape. It was the principle of the camouflage of the guns and the ships in the war. The first year of the war, Picasso and Eve, with whom he was living then, Gertrude Stein and myself, were walking down the Boulevard Rapet a cold winter evening. There's nothing in the world colder than the Rapet on a cold winter evening. We used to call it the retreat from Moscow. All of a sudden, down the street came some big cannon, the first any of us had seen painted that is camouflaged. Pablo stopped. He was spellbound. C'est nous qui avons fait ça, he said. It is we that have created that, he said. And he was right. He had. Social dances popular at the time were the foxtrot and the one-step, traveling its distinctive rectangular pattern across the dance floor. June 25th, 1917, the first silent comedy written by, directed by, and starring Buster Keaton premieres, The Rough House. A delivery boy flirts with Mrs. Ruff, causing a fight to break out with the house cook, who chases him through the house. Russian director Dziga Vertov's documentary, Enthusiasm, depicts the development of labor in Ukraine. Coal miners perform a series of industrial dances, training them in axing in constrained spaces and carrying heaps of coal. Taylorist drills, derived from American theorist Frederick Taylor's ideas of synthesized workflow. The revolution requires 1, a new kind of labor, 2, a new body, and 3, a new human. The hyper-efficient movements of the silent film comedians became an inspiration for the Bolsheviks. Gorky wrote how in a London music hall, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin laughed easily and infectiously on watching the clowns and vaudeville acts, but he was only mildly interested in the rest. He watched with special interest as workers from British Columbia felled trees. The small stage represented a lumber yard, and in front, 2 hefty fellows within a minute chopped down a tree of about 1 meter circumference. Years later, in his autobiography, Buster Keaton wrote, I was so successful as a child performer that it occurred to no one to ask me if there was something else I would like to do when I grew up. If someone had asked me, I would have answered, civil engineer.
carved. You know who this fella is? That's Karl Marx. He's the guy that shot the Russian Tsar. Shot him dead, right in the head. That started World War I, honey. I got him from a Russian business connection.
On December 27th, 1917, in New York City, scholar, writer, and activist William Edward Burgard Du Bois addressed the 9th Annual Convention of the Intercollegiate Socialist Society with a speech titled, "The Problem of Problems." One of the most prominent leaders in the civil rights struggle in the United States in the first half of the 20th century, Du Bois had co-founded the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in 1909. As editor of The Crisis, the NAACP magazine, he led protests for voting rights and against lynchings and the system of legal segregation known as Jim Crow. While he questioned the United States' ability to save the world for democracy with a clear conscience, as long as the country maintained racist policies at home, Dr. Du Bois supported the decision to enter the World War. He had resigned from the Socialist Party, critical of its failure to contend with racism and to abandon its traditional policy that there was nothing special about race questions, that they were simply a part of the general problem of the working class. The backdrop of his 1917 speech was a violent racial conflict in Houston, which I will attempt to explain. The desegregation of the United States Armed Services did not begin until 1948. So in 1917, the 3rd Battalion of the 24th Infantry Regiment of the Army was made up entirely of African American soldiers. Deployed to Houston's Camp Logan, they encountered the segregated streetcars of Jim Crow, Texas, and white co-workers who demanded separate tanks of drinking water and the maintenance of the racial status quo. Houston was not a safe place to be a black soldier. On August 23rd, a rumor reached the camp that Houston police had killed Corporal Charles Baltimore when he interfered with the unlawful detention and assault of a black woman. In fact, Baltimore and another member of the 24th had been beaten, but survived. Reacting to rumors of a white mob, 156 black troops procured weapons and marched through Houston, shooting at white passersby and letting black civilians go free. Local whites armed themselves, and a violent confrontation claimed the lives of 4 soldiers and 15 local residents, wounding many more. After the death of a white National Guardsman, the leader of the black soldiers, Sergeant Vida Henry, committed suicide. In November, the largest court-martial in U.S. military history convened at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio with an all-white jury to try 63 of the soldiers. 41 were imprisoned for life and 13 executed by hanging on December 11th. And now, it's December 27th, 1917, 2 weeks and 2 days later, and W.E.B. Du Bois concludes his speech. Today, pacifists think war a horrible thing, but yesterday, when war was confined to the Belgian Congo, to the headwaters of the Amazon, to South Africa and parts of India and the South Seas, it was not war. It was simply a method of carrying civilization on to the natives, and there were not national conventions on the subject. In the peace proposals that are now being made continually, the future of the disfranchised Indians of the Eastern and Western hemispheres and the disfranchisement of the Negroes in the United States has not only no important part, but practically no thought. What you are asking for is a peace among white folk, with the inevitable result that they will have more leisure and inclination to continue their despoiling of yellow, red, brown, and black folk. Revolution is discussed, but it is the successful revolution of white folk, and not the unsuccessful revolution of black soldiers in Texas. You do not stop to consider whether the Russian peasant had any more to endure than the black soldiers of the 24th Infantry, but you do consider, and consider with the utmost care, that the black soldiers' cause was lost before they took arms, and that for that reason it can be easily forgotten. Thus, in every question that you discuss, and in many other great social questions which you might discuss, frankness and honesty on your part is almost impossible because of the fact that the nation is guilty of continual injustice towards 1/10 of its own citizenship, and that the injustice is deliberate as long as they refuse to investigate it or discuss it, and because if today you saw the righteous and honest solution, you would be frankly unwilling to receive it, unwilling to carry it out, since you would not want to live in a world where Negroes were treated as men. Under such circumstances, you must remember that the integrity of your own souls and minds is at stake. You cannot thus play with the human problem and not spoil your own capacity for reason. You must face the fact that these human beings cannot always remain in their present relation to world movements. I once suggested in the Crisis magazine a method for solving this problem, which was received with a certain gasp of horror, yet I venture to suggest it again. I said that every white family in the United States might choose a person of Negro descent, invite him to their home, entertain him, and then through some quick and painless method kill him. In that way, in a single day, we would be rid of 12 million people who are today giving us so much concern, or rather so little concern. Remember that as ghastly as a proposal of this sort appears, that it is a good deal better than forcing these Negroes into slums and ghettos and letting them die slowly by a high death rate. It is a good deal better than forcing them to the lowest wages and letting them die of inanition. It is even better than presenting them with a program of life and education which includes universal and continual insult with absolutely no hope of normal citizenship in modern civilization. And finally, it is the only one decent alternative to treating them as men.
Мы не умеем прощаться. Все бродим плечо к плечу. Уже начинает смеркаться. Ты задумчив, а я молчу. В церковь войдем, увидим отпевание, крестенны, брак. Не взглядов друг на друга выйдем. Отчего все и у нас не так? Или сядем на снег примятый, на кладбище легко вздохнем, а ты палкой чертишь палаты, где мы будем всегда вдвоем.
We don't know how to say goodbye. We wander on, shoulder to shoulder. Already the sun is going down. You're moody, I am your shadow. Let's step inside a church and watch baptisms, marriages, masses for the dead. Why are we different from the rest? Outdoors again, each of us turns his head. Or else, let's sit in the graveyard on the trampled snow, sighing to each other. That stick in your hand is tracing mansions in which we shall always be together.
Letter from Virginia Woolf to Violet Dickinson, Tuesday, April 10th, 1917. Lewes, Sussex. Nessa and Duncan came over yesterday. having previously washed themselves, and then went back in a storm late at night to help ducklings out of their eggs, for they were heard quacking inside and couldn't break through. Nessa seems to have slipped civilization off her back and splashes about, entirely nude, without shame and enormous spirit. Indeed, Clive now takes up the line that she has ceased to be a presentable lady. I think it all works admirably. The wind rages incessantly, and Leonard spends his day cutting up the fallen trees. We live on the wood, which smells so delicious. I am trying to read Conrad's new book, but owing to endless talk, I haven't got far. Now we are going to Lewis to buy some plants for the summer. Potatoes, there are none. However, the old ewes give birth nightly behind hurdles at the back of the house, and all day long the lambs keep up an extraordinary loud noise. I hope I shall see you again soon. We have bought our press. We don't know how to work it, but now I must find some young novelists or poets. Do you know any?
It's time for the epilogue. A work for solo piano premiered in 1917 by American composer Henry Cowell. Cowell was a great innovator. He developed many extended techniques for the piano, including picking and strumming inside the piano lid. The work I will play for you now, The Tides of Mononon, is probably the most famous of his tone cluster pieces. The tone cluster is another Cowell invention. It involves using the forearm to play a chord of a run of keys all at once. Bela Bartok wrote to Cowell requesting permission to use tone clusters in his own composition. This pioneering work only lasts 3 minutes. When it ends, that will be the end of our performance. The sea rolls in on the coast of Ireland, upon the brimming water among the stones, wave after wave. The Tides of Mononon by Henry Cowell.